All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am Dr. Ross. I serve as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Equity, and Inclusion. It is so good to be in the company of so many of you to share space with you. Before we get started, I'm going to take a quick moment to just share our land acknowledgement for the Colorado Community College system. The Colorado Community College system acknowledges with respect the land we are presenting from today. The land we are presenting from today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Apache, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Pueblo, Shoshone, Kiowa, and Ute Nations, tribes, and peoples. This land was also a site of trade gathering and healing for numerous other Native tribes. We recognize the indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken, heard, the ties nations have to their traditional lands are renewed and reaffirmed. I recognize that we are joining each other virtually from a variety of places around the state. And again, just want to take that moment to acknowledge the lands that we are all on virtually as well. So again, thank you for being here. We're going to jump right in. We will be together for about 90 minutes today. It is an honor and privilege to welcome with us Jeffrey Kass, Esquire. You've had opportunity to read a little bit about him in the flyer promotional. What I'll share in addition to that is, in addition to just being a unapologetic advocate, champion, and social justice champion, Jeffrey is just an amazing human being. Hopefully I don't embarrass him when I say this, but recently he had the opportunity to represent some young ladies from DPS in a really interesting legal situation where young girls who some of you may remember who actually presented here last year on their No Justice, No Peace podcast on the work that they were doing to create Black history in their community. And so there were some legal challenges, and Jeffrey reached out to those young ladies and helped them from a legal perspective, free of charge, and got his company behind him. And I just, oftentimes we don't get roses for what we do. People don't know the things that happen from behind the scenes. And so I just wanted to publicly say thank you for standing up for young people. I think I speak for everyone on this call when we say students, we put students first, and students mean so much to us. And so anytime someone stands up for students, especially students who may end up on our campuses, just want to salute you and say thank you. And then also want to congratulate you on the recent publication of your new book. And I hope you take a few moments to share with us a little bit about your book. I personally plan on purchasing it and going through that. So that being said, I am going to get out of the way. I am going to turn it over to Jeffrey Kass. And again, Jeffrey, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you again for sharing space, and welcome to the Equity University virtual platform for the Colorado Community College system. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to be here today. I wish that we were doing this in person. In part because I don't always know when my jokes land well, and I can't really adjust since I can't see faces. But also, these are not always easy topics. And because I can't look you in the eye and see your faces and know when you're angry at me and when you're happy with me and those type of things, and that's my purpose here isn't to make people happy or angry, but people do have reactions to these topics. And so, hopefully you'll give me some grace because I can't see you and I can't react to those type of things. So I'll tell you a tiny bit about myself, and then we'll go straight into the meat of things. I'm a lawyer, but I mostly focus on business law and intellectual property law, and it really has nothing to do with race issues or diversity or equity and inclusion. And it was just a collision of my why and passions in life and my legal career that allowed me to help the DPS students. And that's very rare. I never thought those two worlds would ever come together. So I'm also an author, as Ryan mentioned, and I'll talk to you a little bit about my recent book in a little bit. And I do speaking to organizations and educational institutions, small and large businesses, to help them navigate some of these really difficult issues. But I'm a father of a 17, 19, and 21-year-old. So education as a parent is near and dear to my heart, as it is for any parent. So, and I'll say up front, in case I forget later, if anybody wants to reach me and have any further interaction, my email is jeffrey@jeffreykassglobal.com, and I'm sure you have something with my spelling of my name. In my writing world, medium.com, which is the largest writers platform, I'm a top 50 writer on racism, diversity, education, and parenting, and I usually put out 1 to 2 pieces a week there. So if you want follow up on some interesting topics, I try to be engaging, challenging, always throw in some humor. My last piece was called Jews and Their Bagels, but it's not an offensive piece. It's really delving into appreciating what people bring to the table of all different types. So let's dig into this. I mean, one of the things that I get asked all the time is, especially from half of my friends, and I will tell you, I'm not a canceller in life. So my friends are from every walk of life, from right to left and middle and all different permutations. And if somebody is not operating out of an intentional space of hate, in other words, they're not intentionally hating, then I leave space and grace for those people, because I think we've entered a world where we can't disagree and have really good discussions. And so I leave, unless there's an intentional piece there, I leave that space. So, but I get asked a lot by half of my friends, at least, why are we still talking about these issues in 2023? The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. We've had a Black president, we have a Black vice president, a female vice president, obviously. We have DEI efforts that have been going on for a long time now. I want to just place out there that we are not here still talking about these issues because of the KKK or the Proud Boys or some very far right-wing extremist group, or any other extremist group. There's obviously extremists to go around. We're not here because of those folks. I know people disagree with me, but I am of the belief that most people in this country are trying to do the right thing and do feel good and feel right about other people, not necessarily about other people's opinions, but in terms of even my close friends who are on the opposite end of the political spectrum of me do not in their hearts consciously feel hate towards people because of their skin color or because of something else. And so I sort of even joke when I do these talks in person, can I get the racist to go to one end of the room and the non-racist to go to the other end of the room? But the truth of the matter is, we're not here because of consciously racist people. So today's going to be very raw and authentic. There's no judgment here, even though we don't really get to have the same interaction as we would in person. I don't care who you voted for. I mean, I care, but I'm not here to judge you based on your decisions, based on whether you think certain policies. That's not why we're here. This is really for all of us. And I include myself, by the way. This is for all of us, and all people who grew up in the United States have to deal with the issues I'm going to talk about today. And I do like talking to educators, because I feel like, with the one exception I ever had, I feel like most educators want to know how to do better by their students and how to have a better institution for their students, an inclusive educational experience. So I like talking to educators a lot, because I think it's a lower hanging fruit to make real societal change. You guys actually deeply care, otherwise you wouldn't be in this field. So so I want to compare where we are. I'm sure people have heard the term unconscious bias. We throw it around, but we really don't dig deep enough into know what that is. So we have so many programs in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We help people recruit people. We help people when they get there. We help we really have so many programs, and they're all really important. But all of the programs that we have, and why, in my opinion, why we have not advanced the ball further, is because the people, me and you, and I really want to make sure you understand, I include myself, I fail at this frequently. Me and you and everybody, left, right, middle, white, black, we all suffer from this unconscious bias, and we're the ones who are administering the programs that are supposed to help people. We're the ones who are administering the programs that recruit, retain, provide services. And so we, as educators, are, when we suffer from this unconscious bias, and that, by the way, those biases can apply to not just black, white, they apply to a whole host of things. It makes administering those programs, and it makes those programs less than they could be. And so there's actually scientific studies that most of our human actions in the world, on a whole host of issues, are guided by our deep unconscious. And so I'm sure if we have parents in the room, you know, you see this in how we react to certain things. But most human beings have suffered from some type of trauma in their life. I like to be authentic here. I suffered from a lot as a kid. I had volatile parents. We grew up poor. Our electricity was shut off. There's arguing all the time over money that wasn't there. You know, holes punched in walls. I mean, it was a horrible situation. And that seeps into that child. And then it can go in lots of different directions. But no matter what, 20 years later, if the work hasn't been done, and when I was growing up, nobody did therapy. I mean, that was like considered like we called therapists and psychiatrists shrinks. Today, of course, we know that it can be very helpful to people. But if you suffer from some type of trauma, childhood trauma, trauma from a divorce, trauma from, you know, being a victim of violence, trauma from anything at all, if you don't do the work and heal from that trauma, you will continue in your unconscious parts of your mind, act out in some ways that relate to that trauma. It's a scientist. That's not actually a controversial thing that I'm saying. It's scientific based, and we know people are acting out of their unconscious part of their mind. That's just how we as humans operate. And so we do these unhealthy things in our life, and until we heal and bring them to the surface, we're not able to function as the most optimal human beings that we could be. And I certainly, until I got in tremendous healing work many years ago, I would operate out of a space of insecurity when I was in relationships, because my parents' relationship was volatile. And it's like night and day when you do the healing work, how you operate out of a space of calmness. And so that actually is true with every issue that we have trauma in. And I would surmise that the way we've been trained in our media, in film, and in how the news is presented, in our history books, in all of the ways that we've learned about things in life, things that also it includes things that we didn't learn about in life. All of those things create some form of trauma about other human beings, about racial trauma that we have. And we didn't even know that we were being trained in a certain way. And most of us are not aware, even if we're aware on a surface level, we're not aware how deeply our unconscious has been formed when we talk about other people. I'm Jewish, and if I had, you know, $1 for every time somebody assumed that I must be wealthy and I must be control something, or I mean, the ideas that we're fed about that is just so over the top. And some people who don't even mean bad act out those unconscious ideas that they've been taught their whole life. And so now, today is I'll just call it a racial therapy session. We're going to try to bring all of those things to the surface so that we can be aware and learn some like tools on how we can eradicate that unconscious bias so that when we're in the educational setting, whether we're a teacher in a classroom, whether we're in a policy situation where we're developing policy, or whether we're administering a program that's meant to uplift people, then if we haven't eradicated that unconscious bias, those things won't be the best they can be. And by the way, it affects everybody in society. It affects Black people, women, trans, every type of person suffers from this. It's not white people think poorly about Black people because they were taught X. It's actually way bigger than that. I wish it was just one group. It's really everybody, and it affects everybody on some level. And so we pick up this unconscious learning, and now we're going to try to become so aware of it. So what I'd like to start talking about, and I'll leave some time for questions at the end. And a lot of my writing is really focused on this. How can we like unravel the imagery that we have in our heads? So let's talk about like our childhood training. We have been, from the earliest times that any of us can remember. I mean, maybe if you're on this call and you're 22 years old, maybe you got it a little bit better, a little bit, not a lot better, a little bit better. But if I can't believe I'm admitting this publicly. I know I look 35, but I'm actually 54. And the thing is, I mean, my childhood was full of these images. So we know phrases, black magic. We know that is considered like an evil kind of magic. By itself, that really has no effect on any of us. But now let's see if we can start piling on. Black cats, black plague. The black market is an illegal market. The dark side is always the evil one. What color is devil's food cake? It's dark. What color is angel's food cake? It's white. Black has been associated with bad things since the beginning for hundreds of years. And again, I want you to wait before you have a chuckle or think, oh, that's silly. And the reason I say that is because if this would just be one category of items, I might agree with you. I might agree with you that just talking about black magic and black cats and black plague and all of those black, I mean, you've all been, entertained by our televisions and our iPads for many years. You know what I'm talking about. It's in our books. It's in children's books. But if we were just talking about that small group of things I just rattled off, then I might also have a chuckle with you. But I want you to reserve and let's go through, and so we can start to become aware of the trauma that we suffered on these issues as a child, just like any other trauma, and so that we can heal from it, so we can say, oh, wow, that's why I might act out in a certain way when I didn't even mean to. White similarly has been associated with purity, with weddings, with, color of angels, the dove is the nice, all of those imagery that we know. God is usually shown as white in all religions. In fact, there's only one lie that's actually okay to tell in culture. It's a white lie. And so, again, we're starting to now see a pattern of this seeps into us. We're told this at a very young age. It literally took a couple years ago, may the actor rest in peace, who played this, but we didn't really have a marquee black superhero until 2018. We had Superman I grew up with Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. We even had a green superhero before we had a marquee black superhero or any other really group. We had the Green Lantern. I think I still have a comic book that could be worth something somewhere in a box. And we definitely don't have any of those Latino or gay or Middle Eastern or Jewish or other heroes that would fall in those categories either. And so now, who are my heroes as a kid? Every Saturday morning, I watched cartoons, and all my heroes were, we all wanted to wear a Superman shirt or Batman shirt and those type of things. Again, the ball is moving on those issues. So I think kids that are growing up today will have less of this unconscious bias. But as we'll go through here, I'm actually writing a piece right now on how Black folks used to not be portrayed in most commercials on television for many years. Today, they're actually overrepresented in commercials, although I don't think anybody's truly suffering from that. I think the Black population is around 12% of the United States, and today they're represented in 35 to 40% of commercials. But it turns out, for some reason, they're still portraying Black people dancing in a lot of commercials. And what image does that give us about the role of Black people in society as entertainers? Are they here for our entertainment and enjoyment? Again, even today, while again, it's certainly better than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, we still have a lot of work to do on these issues that are still infecting our young people and infecting us as adults. We're not, by the way, we don't stop learning these imagery and we don't stop thinking about these things. We still get these images constantly. Okay, but let's even go above little cultural nursery rhymes and superheroes. That's all fiction. I mean, we all have been told about Thomas Edison. I know it's still not taught in schools, except for there's a special month that's set aside for Black History Month. But in terms of being part of, which by the way has its own bias about not being really part of the rest of history. We're going to teach a special history about you, and the rest of the year we're going to stick to our regular curriculum. But Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, and it's never mentioned that Louis Latimer is the Black man who kept it on. Thomas Edison's light bulb did not stay on that long. Louis Latimer invented the carbon filament that kept it on. And without those two inventors, we would not have our modern day light bulbs. Of course, today we have light bulbs that don't use either of those technologies. If you get the real expensive ones at Best Buy that you can, scream out in your house, okay, turn on my lights. Those are different technology, but the basic light bulb that most people still use today, we don't learn about that. We know about Benjamin Franklin, but we don't really know what Charles Drew did, who was the reason we have blood plasma banks today that allow to save people's lives. We just don't learn that. Unless you're paying attention during Black History Month, we don't learn it when we're just doing basic history class and basic inventions. I can name off from my childhood, 5 to 10 inventors. They're all white men. And what that makes us feel about women, Black folks, or any other group of people that's been excluded from that. I mean, the truth of the matter is we've all heard of Albert Einstein, but I can't tell you how many times. I would say it's more than 70% of people that I've met don't even know that he's Jewish or was Jewish. It's not that makes him a better or worse person, but it allows us to develop appreciation for all different types of people. We already appreciate Benjamin Franklin. We already appreciate Thomas Edison. We should continue, by the way. None of this is to suggest that, oh, well, let's just stop learning about all these heroes. I mean, no, the people we've learned about are important and have made, with all of George Washington's failings and the 100+ slaves that he owned, he also is the reason why we don't have a monarchy in this country. We have to learn in an intellectual way about all types of heroes, but we ought not to exclude entire groups because we're left with the impression in our unconscious mind, not in our, oh, therefore I hate people. That is not the result of this educational system. It's the unconscious part that gets affected from this. And so we know about Alexander Graham Bell. Thank you for the telephone, but we don't know about Garrett Morgan. If 99% of people, when I speak in person, I say, hey, raise your hand if you've heard of Garrett Morgan. They have no idea who he is. Next time you stop at a traffic light, now you'll know who he is. And I just want to, what we're not taught has just as much of an impact on our unconscious bias. I even, recently, Viola Davis is a famous actor, and they call her the Black Meryl Streep. even those type of things, like, wait a minute, Meryl Streep is Viola Davis is in her own right, just as solid of an actor. She's the Black Viola Davis. She's not the, Black Meryl Streep. And so all of those type of things start impacting us on a significant level. Again, we're not aware that it's happening. It just is. It's an automatic thing. So when we're excluding women and we're excluding people of color, of all Latino, whatever it is, I mean, I don't need to fill in every line here. You know what I'm saying is inherently true in terms of who you grew up as your heroes, who you learned about as inventors, who you learned helped build this country. You know, if you're being intellectually honest with yourself, you know that it didn't include large swaths of people. And by the way, it's not because those large swaths of people didn't have massive contributions. You might conclude that, logically, you might conclude, if I learned about this much and therefore people who are not included in that history class, or, I remember when I took world history in high school, we learned about the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution. By the way, I don't recall a thing I learned about either one of those things, but we learned about all of those. We learned, of course, about the American Revolution. The only thing we learned about Africa at all was apartheid in South Africa. And that was because I was in school when that was a major national and worldwide protest. They had bumper stickers on cars that said boycott Shell oil because Shell was a major supplier of energy to the South African apartheid government. That's the only reason we talked about it. Otherwise, Africa, as far as I'm concerned, as depicted to me in movies and in literature, was a jungle, a backwards jungle. That's what we were taught about it. Now, again, nobody said the words backwards jungle. That's just how it was always portrayed. Even the first library in the world, it would come as a shock to people, but it was not in England. It was in Timbuktu in Africa. It had the largest collection of books ever to this day at the time. They had ancient texts in there, of course, handwritten, and it was the first library, the first official library in the world. You might decide to dislike Arabs because of what I'm going to tell you, but Arabs invented algebra. Algebra is the fundamental component of math that we use today to solve problems. It's the basis of calculus. It's the basis of all problem solving. It's how we work out logic problems. It wasn't invented by the Greeks and it wasn't invented by the Swiss. It was invented in the Middle East. Other imagery that really affects how we feel about people. When I ask people, how many people do you think are in the terrorist extremist group ISIS? Usually you'll get hundreds of millions. Turns out there's about 35,000 people in that group today. They're an awful group. They're dangerous. I'm not making a joke about them, or the Taliban or any other extremist group, but there are 1 billion Muslims in the world. Like, to somehow this idea that we learn about a percent of a percent of a percent of a group of people that we can't ignore, but then we don't learn anything positive about the other almost billion people. We're left with ideas about Muslims and Arabs that just aren't accurate. I remember seeing a meme years ago that said, usually, by the way, memes are dangerous because they're usually not backed by anything whatsoever. But this was a cute meme because it said, if there ever is a terrorist attack in the United States, you better hope there is a Muslim around because there's a hell of a lot more Muslim doctors than there are terrorists, which is true. But I remember when George Bush was president after 9/11, he was keenly aware of the ideas that we have in our heads about Muslims. And at ground zero, he said, please, Americans, don't blame all Muslims. This is not a ticket to go start harassing your Muslim neighbors. Like, most Muslims are not involved in 9/11. Most Muslims are horrified by 9/11. And so, but the images that we're constantly fed, and listen, the news, we all know, the news, I'm not one of these people that thinks the news outlets all get together and have one giant meeting to figure this out, but the news is there to make money off. And what sells is not, Ryan is a dear, dear friend of mine. That's not really news for them to sell on the news. If I hit Ryan, Jewish man hits black man, all of a sudden we've got front page story. It's not news. Jeffrey Kass takes lox and bagels out to Ryan to try his first Jewish food. That's not news. And so the news is really it's helping perpetuate. It's not that it's fake news. If somebody hits somebody, that is real news. I get a little disturbed by everybody calling everything they don't like fake news, but it's not that it's all fake. It's that it's hyper focused on things that just continually perpetuate these biases that we have. We can all talk about crime in Chicago, but most of us can't talk about the thousands and thousands of rock stars that are changing people's life for the better in Chicago, that are helping kids learn to read and get to the next level. We don't hear about any of that. So you just left with the impression that Chicago is just a bunch of animals. And that's just not accurate. I was actually, this plays out I see this happen in my life all the time. I was actually, a couple years ago, I was at one of my kids' high school graduation, and I was actually on my way to Rwanda and Uganda the following month. And there were other parents at the table. There was like a dinner for parents, and we were talking about travel, and I said I was going there, and with a straight face, nobody had white hoods on they weren't wearing white hoods to the table. Literally, I always say, I'm not going to say the word literally. My 17-year-old daughter does that all the time, and it's literally is the new like. The person said, aren't they just all, tribes over there? And the notion that the idea that they were trying to ask me about was this idea that they thought people just lived in jungles in Africa. Now, there are tribes in Africa. That is true. But we've been conditioned to think that way about the entire continent. And turns out 75% of Africa actually is not jungle. 75% of Africa is not jungle. It's worth repeating. There are universities, and there are large buildings, and there are entrepreneurs, and there are people inventing amazing things. Long before PayPal and Venmo, they had already came up with a payment system like that, like 2-3 years before we did. It's just, but we don't know about those things. Our news here in the Americas hyper focused on America first. We always hear this term, America first. I'm like, it's important to learn about the rest of the world. It's important so that we know that, wow, there's lots of great people from all different groups of people in the world doing great things. And that's important for how we can act out in the world when we come across those people. And it's, we also don't even learn about their tragedies, which is, I think, equally important to have a sense of compassion. I'm glad that most people in the world know about the Holocaust. It's important. So when we see anti-Semitism, when we see people hate, we have a sense of history. And Colorado, for example, mandates Holocaust education, which I think is critically important. So we know when we don't speak out against hate, what can happen. And we know what happens when silence is the response to hate. I mean, the Holocaust is obviously the most extreme of the examples, but that actually started with cultural things, and then it went to, small laws, to bigger laws, to violence. And the next thing you know, the whole society is, there are exceptions, but most of society just sat and watched. And so it's important to learn about that. But I would surmise one or no people on this call know that 3 million Nigerian Igbo were massacred in the 1960s. 3 million people. That's kind of close to getting to Holocaust level genocide. Not a peep. We don't learn a peep about it. And we even have views about, about Jewish people like that, Jewish equals white. 60% of the Jews in Israel are people of color from Middle Eastern or Spanish background or North African background. We have these images affect how we view other people. And sometimes, by the way, the imagery can be positive about another group, and sometimes it can be negative. But I think it's important that we get a more fundamentally comprehensive view of the world in order so that we can operate out of space of no unconscious bias or very minimal unconscious bias, because we don't harbor those deeper, well-developed, and I do mean well-developed ideas about people based on information, false information, and lack of information. I really could go on with a gazillion more images, but I think you at least have a flavor for how we've all been raised and how we've all been conditioned. And if you're being honest with yourself, it is a matter. My daughter has a saying: "Common sense isn't so common anymore," and it is a matter of common sense that these would affect us. It's not. By the way, it's okay. It's not our fault. I mean, I think that's an important part of grace here. It's not our fault that I attended school and learned about world history and it left out large parts of the world. It's not our fault that nobody taught me about Black inventors. It's not our fault that the movies, up and really till the 80s, Black people were mostly criminals in movies. I mean, it's changed obviously a lot since then. It's not my fault, but it is my fault once I learn about it and I don't do anything about it. So I think giving us each grace to ourselves so that we can say, wow, I didn't realize that these were affecting me in a certain way. Because I want to go back to, I assume we're all operating out of a space of, I'm not consciously hateful towards other people. I don't go around saying, I hate Blacks, I hate Asians, I hate gay people. Most people aren't doing that. But those unconscious ideas in our head do affect how we act, just like it affects somebody who suffered childhood trauma, who might act out in a way of insecurity in a relationship, not because they're trying to, they just can't even help it. So let me, I want to switch gears to how this plays out in our lives. And by the way, it's also important to note unconscious bias, and we see this unfortunately in the news so much. Most police officers, I'm going to say, and again, there are people in the world that disagree with me, and I get the place they're coming from. There's a place of deep anger and deep fear. Most police officers are not consciously racist. That is my sincere belief. But they are the same people like you and me who suffer from deep unconscious bias and might hold unconscious fears that cause them to do things, even when they're not operating out of a space of, gosh, I hate this person, therefore I'm going to tase the person 10 times more than I should. They're not operating out of that. Again, there are obviously racist police officers. I'm not going to diminish the fact that what happened with George Floyd and other things certainly could be done by very deeply consciously racist people. I used to live in St. Louis, and I remember hanging out with a friend of mine who had police officers as friends, and there were two police officers at a bar. We're all just drinking, and they were dropping the N-word like there was no tomorrow. Those are the same people that were patrolling a Black neighborhood. Those, I believe, are consciously racist people, and that they shouldn't be on the force. But for the majority of people, the people who suffer from unconscious bias are teachers, they're judges, they're doctors and healthcare professionals, they're your bosses, they're your coworkers, they're landlords, they're apartment owners, they're people on hiring committees, they're people on diversity committees, they're politicians making policy, they're Democrats and Republicans, they're people making 3 strikes and you're outlaws, without regard to why and how these things can affect people, because they're operating out of the same unconscious bias that they've been trained on for all these years. So I want you to think about, I'm going to say some things that are uncomfortable, but I want you to think about how this may have played out in your own life. A black man, you live in a white neighborhood, and a black man dressed in jeans and a t-shirt is walking down your street, and you don't recognize the person. I want you to just think back to any time this might have occurred in your life, and I suspect it's occurred in most of our lives in one form or another. And I want you to think about what a split reaction you might have had. Not, oh my God, I hate that person. None of us probably felt that way. I'm going to assume that. I like to think the good in people, and I do think we're inherently good. Despite all the crap that goes on in this world, I think people have an inherently good piece of them. And so I'm going to assume that that was not the thought that went through your head. But how many people, how many of us, including me, including if you're black, including if you're, how many people thought something negative, whether it was for a split second, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or in a worst case scenario, a phone call to authorities? How many people thought, I wonder if that person's here to rob somebody? How many people thought, I wonder why they're here? How many people would think a whole host of things? Again, even if it's for a split second and you did the right thing and you got it out of your head, how many people had just had that slight reaction, and even though they're not a hateful person? This happened, by the way. There was a man going to his Cherry Creek, very expensive, $10,000 a month apartment. And he was going to his apartment, condo, whatever it is down there. I can't believe people pay $10,000 for a condo down there, but that's a separate issue. And the police were called on him by a white liberal neighbor. I would surmise that the white liberal neighbor who, I know the details, and I'm not going to say the details, person who's involved in politics on the left. And again, I'm picking on the left only because this infects all of us, not because somebody on the right wouldn't have done the same thing, but this infects all of us. She had an instant fear, just like the Democratic bird watcher in New York had an instant fear of a black man. That's not based on, I'm over here reading, the KKK website. That's not where these people got their ideas. And by the way, I don't think people should be punished for the rest of their life for doing the wrong thing. We need to give space for people to improve. We need to give space for, we're in a bad space where somebody does the wrong thing and they want to make it right. They want to learn. They express, you know what? I didn't know that. I'm not talking about people who did the wrong thing and I'm going to continue to do the wrong thing. Though that's not a true owning. But for people who say, oh shit, I don't know why I did that. That was wrong of me. I'm so sorry. For those people, I'm not saying they shouldn't suffer any consequences, but they shouldn't be permanently canceled for the rest of their life. We need to be able to leave space for people. Otherwise, we just live in a society where we say we want people to improve, but we expect 0 to perfection in 5 seconds. That can't be how we operate in our educational institutions either. We see it time and time again. Somebody says or does the wrong thing, and the next thing you know, there's so much pressure, and that's it. They're terminated forever. They should be terminated if they actually have no remorse. They don't understand. They're not willing to understand. But for the rest of people who want to just sit down and have a conversation, maybe there's another mechanism we can use to help educate that person. So I just want you to think about how you might have thought in that situation. And then I also want you to think about, and maybe you can't even think about this because it's a non-event. Think about if that same person was white walking down the street in your neighborhood. Would you have even noticed the person? I can't, as we sit here, I can think of the other incident. I mean, I'm heavily involved in these issues. I can't say that that's never happened in my life. I would be lying to you if I didn't say there was never a time that something came into my head, even though I said, no, don't be a jerk. Come on. Those things happen to all of us. And so I can't remember any time I had, again, keep all of the facts same. We have a tendency to start adding facts. Well, what if he was dressed grungy? What if he had a bag that was I didn't add any of those facts, so I don't want you to add those facts. They don't exist in this scenario. It's a person with jeans and a white t-shirt. That's it. I don't want you to start adding facts. Of course, we need to be smart. Of course, if a woman is walking down a street by herself, she should be aware of multiple things going on and aware of your surroundings. But I'm just suggesting if the only factor that in our head is what is causing us to have a reaction, that it might be based on those unconscious biases. And so just start thinking about and bringing those issues to the surface. What if in my neighborhood, I get people knocking on my, even though I didn't put this on my door, but the people I bought this house from here in Lowry, it says no solicitation. It's like they glued it into my house. I can't even remove it without ruining my brick. I don't really want that type of message out to the world, but it's on my house. Despite that, I'm solicited every week by somebody who, if there's hail, they want to replace my roof and landscaping and other painting my house. A black man knocks on your front door around dinner time one evening. What is your reaction? Again, let's just say he's dressed in jeans and a polo shirt. Let's not throw in other things into the situation. Do you talk to him through the peephole? Do you keep your screen door locked? Are you talking to them in a way that expresses fear on your behalf? Again, not because you said, I hate this person. That's not what's going on. But what was your reaction? And do you do the same thing when somebody who looks like you is at the front door? Do you say, come on in? Or if you're not the type of person that doesn't want any strangers in your house, do you at least open the door? Do you offer the person, a LaCroix to take with them? Is there anything that you were doing different? And again, you might not even think of something right now, but I want you to just reflect. I think the biggest way of self-improvement is self-reflection on everything we do, no matter whether it's dealing with race issues or how we talk to our kids or whether we raise our voice, like self-reflect on things. Do you open the door more? Do you feel safer in certain situations? Clothing the same, depending on who the person is. And again, most of us operating out of a space of unconscious bias don't always get it right. And again, I'm not here to suggest you should never take safety measures. I'm just here to suggest if the safety measures you're taking are based solely on a person's skin color or nationality or ethnic or religious, whatever they're wearing, then I suspect that's operating from a place of unconscious bias. So digesting these things, or, if you've been in downtown Denver, if there are black men walking towards you, do you cross the street? Again, no other facts added to do you cross the street out of some fear that just overtook you? Most people I know, including black people, have done that. Again, I don't want you to start throwing in other facts that make the situation more dangerous than it is. That is the easy way out of self-reflection here, is to start adding in facts that justify your actions. There are many times where you could be justified to cross the street, black, white, anybody. There are many times you should be justified to cross the street, especially if you're talking about all men and a female. Like, there are many times, but no other factors thrown into the mix. Can you think of times where maybe you acted out of fear and not out of hate? Keep in mind, I'm not saying you acted out of hate, but out of fear, which I surmise is caused by this unconscious bias, because we tend not to cross the street when two white men are coming towards us, all facts the same. And so we need to start thinking about how we act in these circumstances and why we're acting in those circumstances. Once we kind of self-reflect and we're able to acknowledge, I mean, they always say part of the solution is acknowledging the problem. This is acknowledging the problem. We're acknowledging that we've been fed a steady diet of information and lack of information about a whole group of people. I talk a lot about the Black community only because my background is in Black studies, and I've been a writer for many years on these topics, but it really applies to how we feel about people in other situations. It happens to be this, we've been sort of fed an idea about fear of certain people, but other things, we have negative views about other people, or even, honestly, even positive stereotypes can be. I once had somebody, say, well, I would only hire a Jewish lawyer. They thought they were complimenting me. Well, let's play that out. First of all, I know some bad Jewish lawyers, so that's already a problem. You might hire a bad lawyer. Second, what happens to the Black person who worked so hard to get through, overcame challenges, economics, became a lawyer, and is a damn good lawyer, but he's going to get passed over because the Jewish lawyer is going to get the business. It's not a good way to operate. Or you have a pickup game of basketball outside. You want the best players on the team, but you pick the Black guy only because of the skin color. It's not a negative stereotype to say, Black, somebody's good at something. Like, that's a positive stereotype. But those positive stereotypes can actually have adverse consequences. So we need to be thinking of, to be careful with the stereotypes as well. But all of that unconscious bias works. It's so complex. It affects us in so many different twists and turns. Fortunately, and this is the most important part of, what I want to talk about today. I'm not going to give you an entire, by the way, these issues are far deeper than what I'm talking about. In fact, the title of my book, which I'll talk about at the end, I don't know if you can see this, is Black Batwoman versus White Jesus. And the Black Batwoman, because when there was a Black Batwoman portrayed, like the superhero world went crazy. Like, this is a bunch of woke BS. Like, Batwoman's not Black. I'm like, turns out Batwoman's actually fictional. I mean, this idea that Black Batwoman's not Black, like, they're not anything. It's a fictional character. And White Jesus is, listen, I think the pendulum can swing extremes in other. I mean, Jesus is from the Middle East. Let's not kid ourselves. So we don't have any depictions of how Jesus looked, to be honest with you, but we know it wasn't Michelangelo's depiction, and we know the person was in the Middle East. Whether they were, olive skinned or darker skinned, we don't know, but we know that it wasn't somebody from Norway. And so anyway, that's what I focus on, is kind of talking about these issues in the book, and how to, there's literally, dozens and dozens of pieces that dive into these issues from every angle. So let's talk about, I used to say, let's talk about the vaccine, but since that's somewhat controversial for some people, let's talk about the cure. There are multiple ways to cure unconscious bias. One of them is having seminars on what we're talking about today, and delving into why the images you've been fed are wrong, and reading books, and attending webinars, and that takes a very long time. They're all very important. I highly recommend that you educate yourself on those issues, but that's a really long process. And not everybody even with my book, I have friends that, is your book on audio? Because they don't read books. I'm like, it's not on audio. I don't know if you want to listen to my voice for 3 hours, but it's not on audio. And so some people they're not going to read it. And a lot of our information is in books. So there is another way that we can really put a dent in unconscious bias. And that is, there was something called social distancing during COVID. I came up with a kind of a phrase about the race issues and how we can do this, and it's called end racial distancing. In fact, I even have a mug that says end racial distancing. And the idea behind it is we do okay in our workspaces. We go to coffee with our colleagues who are different. We go to coffee with a gay person. We grab coffee with a black man. Our workforces are relatively integrated. Again, certain professions are more represented than others, but most places of work, especially at larger companies, if you go to the Coors they're very integrated. But who are we letting into our after 5 p.m. spaces? So I like to, it reminds me of an incident I saw years ago at the movie theater. A woman in front of me was with her daughter, and they asked, they were getting the prices for the movie tickets. And if you're under 12, the movie ticket is like 50 cents less than it is if you're an adult. And they asked the woman, "Oh, how old is your daughter?" She said 11. And she said, "Mommy, I'm 12. What just occurred there is this person told their child probably her whole life, "Daughter, I need you to be honest. I want you to be honest. Be honest, be honest, be honest, be honest." We pound it into our kids' heads. I mean, that's one of the marquee things we tell our kids. Anytime they lie, they get in trouble. So wait a minute. Our words are be honest, be honest, be honest, but our actions are it's okay to lie for 50 cents at the movie theater. So now we've just one it's okay to lie for 50 cents undoes 500 be honest. The kids learn from our behavior. So it's the same with race. When we tell our kids, don't be racist, love all people, love all people. Almost every household I know, and I really mean this, almost every household I know, including friends of mine who are, voted for Donald Trump, love Donald Trump, they tell their kids, love all people. Don't be racist. It's what all of us, unless you're a member of some hate group, it's what we all tell our kids, don't be racist. And yet 99% of us, our tables at our homes for dinner are always the same. How many of us have not operated in a space of 100% all white? If you're white, I mean, this really applies to any group, but if you're white and you've had all white dinner tables, wait a minute, child, don't be racist, don't be racist, don't be racist. And by the way, our household's always going to remain the same. People who are different aren't going to be in our house. Now, again, that's not a conscious plan that we all concocted to try to be racist, but the behavior that we're teaching people by limiting our after 5 p.m. spaces is that of the other. They're different, or they're less than, or they're not worthy of being at our table. Whatever, again, it's not conscious, but that is what we're teaching our children when our after 5 spaces are not diverse and they're not filled with different types of people. And by the way, this plays out in the deepest way possible. I once had a family over for a Friday night Shabbat dinner. For those of you who don't know, Jewish families sometimes have like a Friday night meal together. It's part of the end of the week, the Sabbath, as we say in English. And there was another family over, and something had happened in the news recently, and some 12-year-old boy had said something about, all Muslims are terrorists. My 11-year-old son, who was actually never the person who wanted to be the center of attention. He was quietly a good student, and he quietly went about his business. He wasn't the person that would be in class like I was as a kid. Oh, I know the answer. It wasn't him at all. He knew the answer, but he never raised his hand. It's just, he goes through life with a quiet sense of humility that I think is beautiful. He stood up from his chair at the table, never saw this before. And he said to this other kid who was similar age, "You can't say that about all Muslims. My father has many Muslim friends." I did not orchestrate that. I did not tell my son he needed to speak up. He just inherently knew, because my house has been filled with people from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq, from different places in the Middle East, and they've hugged my son and they've told my how much they love being around my kids, and he's seen the beauty and he's experienced that. He automatically, in his unconscious space, where he's not even the type of person that is the center of attention, and instinctively, it was just like, it didn't even think about it. He just immediately spoke up. We're not all going to be people who speak up at every moment, but I will tell you the behavior as parents, but also just as adults towards other adults, it works. And so ending racial distancing in our most intimate parts of our life really is the cure to these unconscious bias issues. We can hire diverse people, we can admit diverse people, we can treat diverse customers well, we can make sure that we're not saying bad things about all types of people. But if we're not aware of what's happening in our own heads, and we're not what's driving our behavior in life, then we're still not going to operate out of the right spaces. So some examples of how we can do, well, first of all, in the educational setting, we can actually create programs that encourage our staff and our teachers and our administrators. We can actually encourage and even have programs that create out of work experiences. We can have, we can have off work dinners arranged where people go to each other's homes and get to know each other on a different level. You think it sounds silly, but it's actually part of the prescription to, like, not to talk politics, by the way. I have 5 close friends that are Saudi men. As a Jewish man, there's not a lot of Jewish men that are friends with Saudis. There are no Jews that live in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Israel do not have normalized relations. There are no flights between the countries. The views about in Saudi Arabia towards Jews is a negative one. The views of Israelis towards much of the Arab world is a negative one. And so I met them at a coffee shop over a few-year period. They were students at DU and CU, and I just met them at coffee shops, and we didn't start by talking politics. We started by talking good coffee. We shared some laughs, and then we shared some dinners. Then they met my kids, and then they were in my homes. At no time are we talking politics. We talked about the similarities between Islam and Judaism, which are significant. They knew they weren't going to get served pig at my home, and vice versa. And now, fast forward over a couple of years, I went to visit them as they finished their schooling, went back home. Their families were told about me. People came out of the woodworks to meet me. I was treated like a king in their country. And now I'm sitting in a tent outside of Riyadh in the middle of the desert with 10 men that I've started to get to know as they got to know me. And now they're able to ask a question in a safe place. They said, "Can you tell me, Jeffrey, the difference between Zionism and racism?" They didn't ask me in a, "Oh, how dare you" kind of way. They just wanted to know. They had these ideas they were taught in their head, but now they have a safe place to ask me. That's true of, by the way, any interaction with people who are different. You will learn things and have a safe place to ask a question. Maybe after having somebody, you never had anybody Black in your home, and now you've had somebody Black in your home 6 times, you've gotten to know them. Maybe it's okay to ask a question that you've always wanted to ask, and maybe you'll learn something new that you didn't know before. Or, I mean, I fortunately have been part of Black community since I was a teenager. And it's all one thing I've inherently learned by having my after 5 p.m. spaces is that stereotype of Black men being angry, dangerous people. It's actually, the irony of that is so absurd, because during COVID, there was only one group of people that demanded to still hug me. It was my Black male friends. It's the warmest group of people. Like, it's so absurd. And so, but we're not going to know that if we're left to the imagery of television and movies and the news, which highlights the negative. We're just not going to know that. So I recommend, and another thing that educational institutions can do, not just in the after 5 p.m. spaces, but if you have people from different countries, you can have dinners that are where you bring many different people to dinners that, and the food that's served is from a different country. I used to, when my kids were younger, I used to cook. Cooking's my favorite hobby. I'm not suggesting everybody needs to become a cook here, but one thing I used to do for them is I would cook a meal from Sri Lanka, and then I would teach them about Sri Lanka. I just got it from Wikipedia, but I would just learn some basic stuff. Where is it located? What religions are there? What language do they speak? Did somebody used to colonize it? When did they get their independence? What are fun things about their culture? 5 fun facts that I would print out and teach my kids. And then we would have this meal, and they'd eat a delicious meal, and they'd learn about this country. And in fact, there's a funny thing that happened. My daughter was in elementary school, and they were learning about the former Soviet Union, and the teacher mispronounced the country Azerbaijan. And my daughter, who can probably has my sarcasm a little bit, which is my fault, she raised her hand and said, "Excuse me, Mrs. Ruler, you pronounced that country wrong. She pronounced it Azerbaijan, which is the correct pronunciation." And the teacher says, "And you know this how?" "Because 2 weeks ago, my father made a meal from that country and we learned about it." This stuff has its way of seeping into the kids, but we can do that on an adult level too. We can have dinners. We can teach about, I've actually traveled with Dr. Ross, and he's probably more afraid to try foods than I am. But it's because he, like all of us, suffer from an unconscious bias about what normal food is supposed to be. Like, what is normal food? Goat is the #1 consumed meat in Africa. And it's actually healthier than beef, is higher in protein, and has less cholesterol. And if prepared right, actually is quite tasty. But an American who has been kind of taught how to feel about food might have some biases. "Oh, a goat? I'm not eating a goat. That's disgusting." I've actually had people say that to me. What do you mean you have goat in your freezer? So we can create those kind of programs on campuses and in staff with students as well, where we bring people together in more intimate settings, not for the discussion of race issues, not to discuss politics, but just to have safe places to break bread, safe places to learn on a personal level about somebody and maybe create friendships that wouldn't otherwise have been created. It takes some time, but if we have programs that are geared towards these intimate spaces, the next thing you know, people are inviting them over for their family events. They're inviting them over for dinners when it's not orchestrated by the school. They're doing those type of things. And by the way, diversity, I want to be clear. We sometimes don't use language correctly. Diversity does not mean Black people and women and gay people and Latinos. Diversity means all of us. That is so huge. Diversity means having everybody at the table. Diversity does not, when we say we want a diverse group of people, that includes all of us. And we need to always be cognizant of that. We ought not exclude people who don't fall into the marginalized category or don't fall into the historically have had extra challenges beyond the normal challenges in life. Of course, I grew up poor. White people can be poor and they can have challenges. They can feel like they're not privileged. But we need to include all those voices when we're doing all of these things. So I would keep that in mind as we're doing these things as well. But outside of the school settings, there are numerous things we can do in our own neighborhoods. We can start inviting people who are different than themselves into our houses, rather than just saying hello to somebody 4 doors down that might be from India. Like, how about not just saying hello and good morning? That's not really getting to know somebody. That's being friendly. Friendly, we're all good at. We're good at being friendly. that's not enough to start unraveling ideas you might have about that person. Turns out the person could be an artist and not a pharmacist. You know, you could learn something about the person. And, you know, with our children who we, I don't know what some of your universities might even have, you know, daycare and things like that, but who our children play with, it matters. Like who we invite into our homes for our children to play with. You know, all of that matters. How we act, like in other words, screaming at your kid at a toy store, telling them, hey, I need you to calm down or you're not getting any more toys. Like, whoa, I wonder where they learn not to calm down from. Our behavior matters. And it's so true, even more so when it comes to race issues. Our behavior and what we're doing in our lives, it really matters. Maybe being a little extra nicer to people that assume that somebody who is the subject of negative bias in society, assume they've had some challenges on a particular day, because it happens to most people on a daily basis. So maybe maybe we can all try in our lives to be doubly friendlier, so to make up for maybe somebody who wasn't so nice. Again, not in a patronizing way, but in an authentic, genuine way. You know, whether it's at a coffee shop. And by the way, I hear this all the time. Somebody says, oh, I don't have any black people in my house because I don't have any black friends. And I say, well, go meet one then. Go meet somebody. I'm like, where would I do that? I get this all the time. Where would I do that? Well, no matter where you live, I'll tell you where. At a coffee shop, at your gym, at the grocery store, at every other place you meet anybody else. People are everywhere. And again, don't approach things in a patronizing way, but if you genuinely have opportunities to get to know people, those opportunities really are everywhere. It's not an excuse to say, I don't have any friends who are different. I mean, it sort of was by unconscious design that we got to that place. And again, most of it's not our faults. I mean, you know, affordable housing and segregated neighborhoods, all that stuff's not our faults, but we have those opportunities to meet people who are different than ourselves. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood that was mostly poor white folks, but I didn't limit my, you know, existence to only having friends who were poor white folks. Make an effort. Other places, by the way, that you can help eradicate these unconscious bias. Support businesses owned by people who are different for a change. Again, it doesn't mean if you have a favorite coffee shop, you should stop drinking the coffee there. But maybe once in a while, try a different business owned by somebody else. That's maybe there's a Black-owned coffee shop. Maybe there's a business that's owned by somebody who's gay. Maybe, and those are opportunities, by the way, to not only meet other patrons that might patronize that business because they want to support, but it could be you meet the owner of the place. By the way, these things play out in real life for me all the time. So it is something that works if you just make the effort. And travel to learn. And not everybody has the money to travel, but when we do travel, are we always picking Paris in England? Are we always picking Italy? Are we always picking places that seem to jive with who we are? I can tell you there are many, many safe and beautiful, gorgeous places with lots of exciting history that are not on your radar. And they're perfectly safe places to go. I mean, Rwanda, by the way, was the cleanest country I've ever been to in my entire life. It turns out they have a national cleanup day every month where every person, I saw people sweeping dirt off of dirt. I mean, pristine. And it's the only country in the world where the majority of people in their legislature, in their Congress, are women. Wow. Isn't that progressive? But I thought Rwanda was just this place of backwardsness. I just challenge you to maybe consider other things when you travel, because as Mark Twain once said, travel is the key to eradicating racism. And you learn so many beautiful things about many different people. So again, also, if you're on vacation and you do go to London and you do go to Paris and you do go to some of these other places, Amsterdam or whatever, and you see American tourists who are maybe Black or Latino or something, and you can assume that they haven't always had the easiest time in America, maybe go out of your way to make them feel welcome even while they're traveling, to let them know that, they don't only need to escape America in order to feel good, that, their fellow Americans, have a friendly face for them. Again, all of these things contribute to starting to eradicate when you start getting to know even school choice for our children. Again, you have to factor in safety. You have to factor in, if your students are really artsy, you want to send them to an art school, all that's fine. But also I would factor in diversity into school choices and those type of things. Because I think, it can be very impactful to grow up around people who are different. The professionals we use, who we bring in, again, I'm not suggesting that you go see a cardiologist who's not known to be a good cardiologist. I'm just suggesting of your professionals you use, from plumbers to doctors to, whatever you use, maybe mix it up a little bit about who you see as professionals. Maybe get to know somebody. And trust me, if your kids see that you're going to a Black chiropractor, like all of a sudden your kid just learned that, oh, Black people can be chiropractors too. Wow, I didn't know that. Nobody ever showed me a Black chiropractor. Nobody ever showed me a Black cardiologist. And by the way, they all exist. They're out there. And again, just same thing, women physicians, just mix it up some. Again, I am not suggesting, especially when it comes to healthcare, that you somehow pick somebody that's got low grades on health grades or something, or you found out they've been sued 27 times for medical malpractice. It's not, again, this goes back to the example in the neighborhood. Don't change the facts to the example. Make sure that if they're otherwise a credible and a good at their profession, that you consider doing that. And frankly, even the speakers you bring in your various classes in schools and lessons that you give, bring professionals in from different backgrounds that have nothing to do with race, by the way. It's just subliminal, unconscious bias eradication techniques that if people know that, that there exists this whole world of excellence out there that they've never been taught, they're going to start thinking differently about people. And they're going to realize, it turns out all of us have some really bad people among us. All of us have some so-so people among us. All of us have some great people among us, that we're, at the end of the day, we're more actually alike than we are different. And we won't know that if we don't let them into those spaces of professions in your house and your tables and all of those different things. There's an English writer, and I've been unable, I thought it was Samuel Johnson. I've been unable to actually verify who wrote this, but there was a quote that I loved. It says, "The only people I don't like are the people I have not met." It's a really, I mean, obviously we don't like everybody, but it's a very powerful idea. And it really underscores the depth of how unconscious bias can be eradicated. Again, I know these topics are not comfortable. I'm sure some of you may have cringed at a few things, but again, this isn't about judgment, and this isn't about, it's really about changing the narrative from, hey, we keep having unsuccessful diversity and inclusion programs where people still feel like they're not being included, or we haven't been good at recruiting, and we haven't been, whatever our programs that are inefficient, or programs that haven't been as successful, which is why we still have diversity committees. I just challenge you that if we educate ourselves and all the people that are working on these very important issues, implement programs, and also change our personal lives, that we are in not that long of time period, we can change every institution, every organization, and society eventually, if we really work on these issues. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time. Well, first of all, let me just tell you, this book just came out on Martin Luther King Day. And I want to be clear, I don't earn my living from writing. and I don't earn my living from speaking. I have a successful business law practice, and that's how I pay my mortgage. So this is, I think they pay me like $2 for a book, and I for sure invest far more in the time that I spend writing than $2. This is my last book. It is on Amazon. It'll probably be in some Denver bookstores soon, but for now it is on Amazon, and it really is a whole host of essays that deal with these issues. They deal with, I mean, you know, I have a piece called The Making of Black Diamonds, which talks about how people that go through extreme hardship sometimes turn out to be diamonds, just like how diamonds are made. And it talks a lot about the excellence that some communities have that are getting unnoticed. There's something I'm talking about here. There's a piece called Racism Ends Where Coffee Starts. There's a piece called My Grandfather Was a Nazi. He wasn't, but the piece is really about if we have family shame, how not to carry that with us. The Invention of the Black Race, which talks about how race was a human construct. The Black Meryl Streep, which we talked about. You've Been Canceled, which talks about why cancel culture is really unhealthy. Should we disband the police? That kind of stuff. So it really gets into a whole host of issues that kind of challenge our ingrained thinking. And, you know, the nice thing is they're all completely they're related stories, but it's not one long story. So don't let the thickness of the book scare you. You can read whatever ones you want in whatever order you want. So does anybody, I don't know where the chat, I guess here's the chat. Let me see here. If anybody has any questions, I would love to entertain anything now. If or Ryan, if you have some questions as a follow-up.
So folks, yeah, feel free if you have a question to either drop it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask your questions. We'll take a few questions and we'll be wrapping up here in the next 5-10 minutes.
No questions at all. I know that's not true. So somebody just asked me, what are my thoughts about affirmative action? I will just say, again, we don't have the time here to talk about the history of racism in this country and how deep ingrained it is and why people still suffer from systemic racism today. It's a very long discussion and it's a very complicated discussion. I would just ask you to consider that deep racism still exists and people still go through challenges on a whole host of issues. Affirmative action is not going to solve all of our problems. It never has. On the other hand, it also is not preventing, as the Speaker of the California House, Willie Brown, once said, I don't know of a mass exodus of white people from the workforce because of affirmative action. Affirmative action can help on some moderate level, helping people get opportunity and equitable chances that they might not other have without affirmative action. So I am in favor of those programs, but at the same time, we have to be careful because, you know, we don't want a situation where if somebody can't pick up a ladder, that they're a firemen. Like, in other words, we have to balance it. You know, affirmative action depends on exactly what we're affirmatively acting on. We don't want people who can't do it. But I would say this about affirmative action in education that's really important. And frankly, this is true in my law practice. When you have the most diverse group of people, white, black, gay, men, women, all of the things, again, not in massive disproportion, but when you have different voices and different life experiences at the table, and this is particularly true in my law practice, but it's even more true in the classroom, you're going to get more robust discussion. You're going to get better problem solving. I get solutions to things I would have never thought of because I didn't live that. And so in many circumstances, especially the social sciences and philosophy and political science and those, you know, types of things, I think you're going to get a better educational experience through affirmative action, and white people will benefit from that as well. So I just, there are many aspects of affirmative action, but I don't think it has the massive detrimental effect. And because it has some positive effect, I think it's worth a while.
Isla, thank you for that question. Well, seeing no other questions, just going to end with a couple thoughts. So one of the things that I'd like to ask you to take with you as you participate and think about the different speakers we have, whether it be on Global Minded's Courageous Conversations or within our Equity University, is sometimes that these conversations will or exposure to different topics will provide some closure. Sometimes they won't provide any closure. Sometimes they'll make you leave with more questions, more curiosity, more uncertainty, and that's okay, right? Those are areas that we want to live in, because that helps us explore within ourselves to think differently, to learn more, to ask questions, to create spaces where we can have the courageous conversations. Narrative is so important in understanding where people are coming from and how people are coming from. And so again, as always, we appreciate you for being here. To our speaker, Jeffrey, thank you so much for sharing your space and time with us. I thought it was a great conversation. I think all of us took something away from this conversation, and we really appreciate the work that you do, the sacrifices you make, as well as just your ability and courage to share your thought. Because, you know, as Dr. King once said, the one, and I'm paraphrasing, but one of the greatest challenges or greatest enemies isn't those who oppress us, it's those who are silent. So thank you so much for being here. And again, we will see you guys next month. If you want to reach out to Jeffrey directly, his email is in the chat. It's jeffrey@jeffreycassglobal.com. Or if you want a personal connection, just reach out to me and I can link you. And congratulations on your book. And again, thank you for spending the afternoon with the Colorado Community College System. And thank you all for being here. Once again, I appreciate you. Have a absolutely fantastic afternoon. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.